Biology was a complication again. Edward had continued with his quizzing up until Mr. Banner entered the room, dragging the audiovisual frame again. As the teacher approached the light switch, I noticed Edward slide his chair slightly further away from mine. It didn't help. As soon as the room was dark, there was the same electric spark, the same restless craving to stretch my hand across the short space and touch his cold skin as yesterday. I leaned forward on the table, resting my chin on my folded arms, my head and fingers gripping the table's edge as I fought to ignore the irrational longing that unsettled me. I didn't look at him, afraid that if he was looking at me, it would only make self-control that much harder. I sincerely tried to watch the movie, but at the end of the hour, I had no idea what I had just seen. I sighed in relief again when Mr. Banner turned the lights on. Finally glancing at Edward, he was looking at me, his eyes ambivalent. He rose in silence and then stood still, waiting for me. We walked towards the gym in silence like yesterday, and also like yesterday, he touched my face wordlessly, this time with the back of his cool hand, stroking once from my temple to my jaw, before he turned and walked away. Jim passed quickly as I walked Mike's one-man Batman show. He didn't speak to me today, either in response to my vacant expression or because he was still angry about my squabble yesterday. Somewhere in the corner of my mind, I felt bad about that, but I couldn't concentrate on him. I hurried to change afterward, ill at ease, knowing that the faster I moved, the sooner I would be with Edward. The pressure made me more clumsy than usual, but eventually I made it out the door, feeling the same release when I saw him standing there, a wide smile automatically spreading across my face. He smiled as reaction before launching into more cross-examination. His questions were different now, though, not as easily answered. He wanted to know what I missed about home, insisting on descriptions of anything he wasn't familiar with. We sat in front of Charlie's house for hours as the sky darkened and rain plummeting around us in a sudden deluge. I tried to describe impossible things, like the scent of creosote, bitter, slightly resinous, but still pleasant, the high keening sound of the cicadas in July, the feathery bareness of the trees, the very size of the sky, extending white-blue from horizon to horizon, barely interrupted by the low mountains covered with purple volcanic rocks. The hardest thing to explain was why it was so beautiful to me. To justify the beauty that didn't depend on the sparse, springy vegetation that often looked half dead, a beauty that had more to do with the exposed shape of the land, with the shallow bowls of valleys between the craggy hills, and the way they held on to the sun. I found myself using my hands as I tried to describe it to him. He was quiet, probing questions, kept me talking freely, forgetting, in the dim light of the storm, to be embarrassed for monopolizing the conversation. Finally, when I finished detailing my colored room at home, he paused instead of responding with another question. "Are you finished?" I asked in relief. "Not even close, but your father will be home soon." "Charlie!" I was suddenly recalled his existence inside. I looked out at the rainy, darkened sky, but it gave nothing away. "How late is it?" I wondered out loud as I glanced at the clock. I was surprised by the time. Charlie would be driving home by now. "It's twilight," Edward murmured, looking at the western horizon, obscured as it was with clouds. His voice was thoughtful, as if his mind were somewhere far away. I stared at him as he gazed unseeingly out the windshield. I was still staring when his eyes suddenly shifted back to mine. "It's the safest time of day for us," he said, answering the unspoken question in my eyes. "The easiest time, but also the saddest in a way. The end of another day, the return of the night. Darkness is so predictable, don't you think?" He smiled wistfully. "I like the night. Without the dark, we never see the stars." I frowned. "Not that you see them here much." He laughed, and the mood abruptly lightened. "Charlie will be here in a few minutes, so, unless you want to tell him that you'll be with me Saturday," he raised one eyebrow. "Thanks, but no thanks." I gathered my books, realizing I was stiff from sitting still so long. So was it my turn tomorrow then? Certainly not. His face was teasingly outraged. I told you I wasn't done, didn't I? What more is there? You'll find out tomorrow. He reached across opened my door for me, and his sudden proximity sent my heart into frenzied palpitations. But his hand froze on the handle. Not good, he muttered. What is it? I was surprised to see that his jaw was clenched, his eyes disturbed. He glanced at me for a brief second. Another complication, he said gloomily. He flung the door open in one swift movement and then moved, almost cringed, swiftly away from me. The flash of headlights through the rain caught my attention as a dark car pulled up to the curb just a few feet away from facing us. Charlie's around the corner, he warned, staring through the downpour at the other vehicle. I hopped out at once, despite my confusion and curiosity. The rain was louder as it glanced off my jacket. I tried to make out the shapes of the front seat of the other car, but it was too dark. I could see Edward illuminated in the glare of the new car's headlights. He was still staring ahead, his gaze locked on something or someone I couldn't see. His expression was a strange mix of frustration and defiance. Then he revved the engine, and the tires squealed against the wet pavement. The Volvo was out of sight in seconds. "Hey, Bella," called a familiar husky voice from the driver's side of the little black car. "Jacob?" I asked, squinting through the rain. Just then, Charlie's cruiser swung around the corner, his light shining on the occupants of the car in front of me. Jacob was already climbing out, his wide grin visible even through the darkness. In the passenger seat was a much older man, a heavy-set man with a memorable face, a face that overflowed, the cheeks resting against his shoulders, while creases were running through the rusted skin like an old red leather jacket, and the surprisingly familiar eyes, black eyes that seemed at the same time both too young and too ancient for the broad face they were set in. Jacob's father, Billy Black. I knew him immediately. Then when the more than 5 years since I'd seen him last, I managed to forget his name when Charlie had spoken of him my first day here. He was staring at me, scrutinizing my face, so I smiled tentatively at him. His eyes were wide, as if in shock and fear. His nostrils flared. My smile faded. "Another complication," Edward had said. Billy still stared at me with intense, anxious eyes. I groaned internally. Had Billy recognized Edward so easily? Could he really believe the impossibilities his son had scoffed at? The answer was clear in Billy's eyes. Yes, he could.